Usually when we sit down to talk about revolutionaries,
Mm-hmm.
the mental image is pretty consistent.
Right.
We picture guys hiding in, I don't know, damp caves, writing these furious manifestos by candlelight.
Starving in the mountains, dreaming of a better world, that kind of thing.
Exactly. We don't typically picture them signing contracts with Hollywood studios.
No, that is definitely not the standard revolutionary archetype. Usually, the revolution comes before the movie deal.
But today's subject, he literally signed a deal with the Mutual Film Corporation in 1914.
That's right.
They paid him $25,000, which was just a staggering fortune back then, to film his battles.
And the contract, this is the part that honestly just breaks my brain every time I think about it.
The lighting clause?
The lighting clause. It actually stipulated that he had to fight his battles during the day, so the lighting would be good for the cameras.
It is one of the most surreal moments in modern history.
It really is. You have this real, gritty, incredibly bloody revolution happening. People are dying in the thousands.
Mm-hmm.
And right in the middle of it, you have a director essentially telling a general, hey, Pancho, can you retake that cavalry charge? The sun wasn't quite hitting your good side.
It sounds like fiction, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are looking at the man, the myth, the movie star, and, the murderer, Francisco Pancho Villa.
A man who was effectively two completely different people depending on which side of the Rio Grande or even which side of the Mexican political spectrum you were standing on.
Exactly. To some, especially in northern Mexico, he is the Centaur of the North, this absolute Robin Hood figure who stood up to the superpowers of the world.
But to others.
To others, he's a sociopath, a bandit, a villain who dragged Mexico into chaos.
And our mission today is to try and figure out how both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yeah. We've combed through the biographies, the military archives of his famous División del Norte, and even the accounts of the American soldiers who spent a year chasing him through the desert.
We want to figure out how an illiterate sharecropper managed to build a modern army, run a state government, invade the United States, and become, for a time, the biggest global celebrity of 1914.
And to do that, we have to strip away the caricature.
You have to. You know the image,
Right.
The big sombrero, the heavy mustache, the bandoliers crossed over the chest.
Right.
We need to look at the mind of Doroteo Arango, that was his real name, and understand the rage that really fueled him.
So let's go back to the beginning. Durango, 1878. He is born José Doroteo Arango Arámbula.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources all emphasize this sharecropper background. But I think for a modern audience, we hear sharecropper and we just think, poor farmer. We might miss the severity of what that actually meant in Porfirio Díaz's Mexico.
Yeah, we absolutely need to correct that immediately. In late 19th century Mexico, sharecropper was essentially a euphemism for feudal serf.
So you're not just poor.
You're not just poor. You were, for all intents and purposes, property.
Walk us through the mechanics of that life. What did a day look like?
Well, you lived on a hacienda, which is this massive estate owned by a single family, the hacendado.
Ugh.
You didn't own the land you worked. You didn't own your tools. You bought your food and clothes from the tienda de raya, the company store, at wildly inflated prices.
Ah, the company store.
And you were paid in scrip, not real money. So you were always in debt to the owner. And here's the kicker. In Mexico at that time, debt was hereditary.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So if your father died, owing the hacendado money, you, as the son, inherited that debt.
Correct. You were legally bound to that land until the debt was paid, which of course it never was. The numbers were designed so it was impossible. It was a trap.
That is terrifying. It's slavery with extra steps.
Precisely. And in that environment, the hacendado, the owner, had absolute power. He was the judge, the jury, and the police.
And he often felt he had, the droit du cygne, the right of the Lord.
Exactly. The right to do whatever he wanted with the people, and especially the women, on his land.
And that brings us to the inciting incident. This is the moment Doroteo Arango dies and the outlaw begins.
This is the pivot point for his entire life. The date is September 22, 1894. Doroteo is just 16 years old.
16.
He comes home to his family's little hut and finds the hacienda owner, a man named Agustin López Negrete, harassing his younger sister.
Harassing how? I mean, do the sources get specific?
They vary on the details. Some imply an assault was in progress. Others say Doroteo got there just in time to stop it. But what's consistent across all accounts is Doroteo's reaction. It was immediate.
He didn't try to talk him down or plead with him?
No. There was no hesitation. He grabbed a pistol and he shot the owner.
He shot the hacendado.
He did. Historically, it seems he only shot him in the foot, but the physical damage wasn't the point.
No, the symbolism was nuclear.
Absolutely. A peon shedding the blood of a hacendado. That was an automatic death sentence. There was no trial. There was no calling the police. Negrete was the police.
So at 16 years old, he has one option.
He has to run. He flees into the Sierra Madre Occidental. And these are rugged, unforgiving mountains. And that is where his real education begins. He joins a bandit gang and spends the next several years living as a fugitive.
And this is where he gets that famous nickname, but one I don't think people really think about. La Cucaracha.
The cockroach.
Which, to our modern ears, sounds like an insult. Why would your friends call you a cockroach?
Because in the context of the Sierra Madre bandit world, being a cockroach was the highest compliment.
How so?
It meant you were unkillable. You could scurry into the cracks and canyons where the federal police couldn't find you. You could survive on almost nothing. It implies this incredible resilience.
And during this time, he's not just, sitting around a campfire. He's learning a specific set of skills that are going to be absolutely crucial later on.
Crucial. He is learning the terrain of Chihuahua and Durango like the back of his hand. Every cave, every water source, every hidden trail.
The ultimate home field advantage.
Right. He's learning how to stage an ambush, how to ride for days without sleep, and maybe most importantly, how to inspire loyalty in very rough men.
And he's also living this kind of double life, right? He's not a full-time bandit.
Not always. He would alternate. He'd work as a butcher or a miner or a bricklayer when the heat died down, then go back on the run when the law got too close.
He even got forcibly inducted into the Federal Army at one point, didn't he?
Yes, which was a standard punishment for troublemakers back then. The Army was basically a penal colony.
How did that work out for them?
About as well as you'd expect. He deserted, of course, killed an officer, stole his horse, and went right back to the mountains.
Wow.
And it's after this, around 1903, that he officially changes his name to Francisco Villa. Some say he took the name of his paternal grandfather. Others say a famous bandit from Coahuila. But the transformation is complete. He is a career outlaw.
But, bandits don't usually overthrow governments. They usually just steal cows. So how do we get from cattle rustler to revolutionary general? That's a huge leap.
That leap happens in 1910. Villa has a fateful meeting with a man named Abraham Gonzalez.
And who is he?
Gonzalez was the local representative for Francisco Madero, who was the wealthy, idealistic politician trying to oust the longtime dictator Porfirio Díaz.
Okay.
And Gonzalez looks at Villa and he sees something. He realizes this guy isn't just a criminal, he's a resource. He has skills. He has followers. He has a legitimate grievance.
So it's basically a rebranding exercise.
It is. Gonzalez sits Villa down, and he essentially gives him a new narrative. He tells him, look, you aren't a bandit because you're a bad person. You're a bandit because the system is broken. You're a victim of class warfare. Why steal for yourself when you can steal for the people?
That is a very powerful sales pitch to a guy who's been on the run for 15 years.
It gave him legitimacy. It gave him a cause. For Villa, the revolution was famously described as a change of title, not of occupation.
So he could keep raiding and fighting, but now he was a colonel in the Revolutionary Army, not a fugitive.
Exactly. The game was the same, but the stakes were suddenly much, much higher.
And this brings us to the rise of the División del Norte. Because Villa isn't just leading a gang anymore. He builds this massive, modern military force. And here's the part I really struggle with. You have a guy who is, no offense, great at stealing cows and hiding in mountains. Suddenly, just 3 years later, he is commanding the División del Norte, which becomes the most powerful and feared army in the history of Latin America up to that point. How does a bandit learn to run in modern war?
That is the genius of Villa, and it's something historians often overlook because they get so focused on the wild man image. Villa was an intuitive logistician. He was a natural organizer. So he realized before anyone else in Mexico that the revolution would be won or lost on the rails. He understood that the horse was for fighting, but the train was for winning.
The railroads.
The railroads were everything. The División del Norte wasn't just an army, it was a rolling city. Villa seized and controlled the main rail lines running from the U.S. border down into central Mexico.
And he wasn't just using them to move guys from point A to point B.
No. He used them to industrialize his warfare. He'd capture a town, his men would strip the armory, and the guns would be on a train heading south that afternoon. He moved troops, cattle, artillery, supplies, everything.
I was reading about the hospital cars. This just blew my mind.
Isn't it incredible? This is 1913 in rural Mexico. He gets his hands on 40 boxcars and has them completely refitted as a state-of-the-art mobile hospital.
State-of-the-art how?
He hired a brilliant doctor, Andres Villarreal, to run it. They had dedicated operating theaters, sterilization equipment, x-ray machines, all on wheels.
So Ulster gets shot in the leg on the front line.
Right.
They throw him on a train, and he's getting surgery from a top doctor 10 miles back while the train is moving north to safety.
Exactly. And you have to think about the morale impact of that.
Oh, this has been massive.
In the Federal Army, if you got seriously wounded, you were often just left to rot in the sun. In Villa's army, you knew Mi General had a white train waiting to take care of you. It created this fanatical, unbreakable loyalty.
And he fueled this whole machine with American coal and American guns.
Yep.
But to pay for it. Well, let's talk about his economic policies. Because when he takes over the state of Chihuahua and becomes governor in late 1913, he basically creates his own central bank out of thin air.
The Villa bills. This is another one of those moments where his lack of formal education actually helped him because he didn't know what he supposedly couldn't do.
So what's the situation when he takes power?
He takes power in Chihuahua, and the state is completely bankrupt. The wealthy elites, the powerful Terrazas and Creole families have fled to the U.S. and taken all the silver and gold with them.
So there's no hard currency, nothing to pay the soldiers with.
Nothing. The economy has seized up. So Villa just says, okay, fine, I'm printing my own paper money, and he prints millions and millions of pesos.
Which, historically, is a great way to cause hyperinflation and destroy an economy in about a week. If people don't trust the paper, it's just worthless.
Usually, yes. It's a recipe for disaster. But Villa backed his currency with two things.
Cool.
First, he had just confiscated the massive estates of the oligarchs who fled. Millions of acres of land, thousands of cattle. He announced, this paper money is officially backed by these assets. So it was technically asset-backed currency.
And the second thing?
The second thing was a firing squad.
LAFIS, the lead standard.
Basically, he issued a decree. Any merchant, any banker, any foreigner who refused to accept Villa currency at par with gold would be immediately jailed or executed.
And it worked.
And guess what? It worked. Suddenly, everyone trusted the Villa peso. The economy of Chihuahua boomed because money was moving again. He understood the velocity of money intuitively better than the formally trained bankers did.
And he wasn't just hoarding this new wealth. This is where that first welfare state concept comes in.
Yes, that's a term from the historian Friedrich Katz. Villa used the proceeds from these confiscated estates to fund pensions for the widows and orphans of his soldiers.
That's amazing.
He slashed the price of meat so the poor could eat. He literally had his soldiers butchering the confiscated cattle and just handing out steaks in the plaza.
It completely validates that Robin Hood image. He wasn't just a destroyer, he was a redistributor.
He absolutely was. He had a vision. He was obsessed with building schools. For a man who only learned to read properly while he was in prison, he had this deep, profound belief that education was the only way to permanently break the cycle of peonage.
But of course, he couldn't stay a governor forever. The war against the usurper president, Victoriano Huerta, was still raging.
It was.
And that leads us to the Battle of Zacatecas in June of 1914.
The big one. The bloodiest and most decisive battle of the entire revolution. But to understand Zacatecas, you have to understand the friction that was building within the revolutionary camp itself.
Right. Villa was nominally fighting under the command of Venustiano Carranza, the first chief of the revolution.
But they were oil and water, complete opposites.
Describe Carranza for us.
Carranza was a wealthy landowner, a civilian, a stiff, formal politician with a big beard. He looked down on Villa as an uncouth bandit, a savage. And frankly, he was terrified of him.
Terrified why? Because he was so popular.
Because he was popular and he was winning. Carranza knew that if Villa's army took the strategic city of Zacatecas, the path to Mexico City would be wide open, and Villa, not Carranza, would likely take the presidency.
So Carranza tries to sabotage his own top general.
He does. It's a classic power play. He orders Villa to divert his troops to attack a strategically meaningless target, Saltillo. Then, he cuts off Villa's coal supply to immobilize those famous trains.
What does Villa do?
He's furious. He actually sends a telegram resigning his command in protest.
He quits the revolution.
He tries to, for about a day. But his generals, the other senior leaders of the División del Norte, refuse to accept it. They send a telegram back saying, essentially, we don't work for Carranza, we work for you. They rallied around him.
Wow.
So Villa unresigns, tells Carranza where he can stick his orders,
Yeah.
fires up the trains with firewood or whatever they could find, and marches on Zacatecas.
And the battle itself, from what I've read, it sounds just horrifying.
It was brutal. Zacatecas is a city built in a bowl, surrounded by these very steep mountains. The Federal Army had 12,000 men with machine guns and artillery dug in on all the peaks. It was a fortress.
So Villa had to send his men charging up those slopes.
Uphill into machine gun fire. But they did it, wave after wave. They overran the positions in a single day of ferocious fighting. The numbers are staggering. We're talking 7,000 dead on the federal side, 5,000 wounded.
It completely broke the back of the Huerta regime.
It did. Huerta fled the country a few weeks later, but instead of a huge victory party, this victory cemented the split between Villa and Carranza. The common enemy was gone.
So the Allies immediately turned on each other.
Immediately. And this is where the revolution turns into a civil war between the winners.
And you have these two clear factions, right?
You do. You have Carranza and his brilliant, pragmatic general, Álvaro Obregón, representing the interests of the middle class and the landowners. And on the other side, you have Villa in the north and the great Emiliano Zapata in the south, representing the peasants and the cry for land reform.
And for a brief, shining moment, Villas and Zapata actually meet. They take Mexico City.
They do. And there's that famous photograph of them at the National Palace.
Paint that picture for us. It's so iconic.
It really is. You have Villa, this big barrel-chested man, and he's sitting in the ornate, gilded presidential chair, slumped down in it, really. He's leaning back, legs crossed, looking huge and jovial, like he completely owns the place.
And Zapata.
And next to him is Zapata. He's smaller, darker, holding this giant sombrero in his lap. And he looks so uncomfortable, so out of place. He's staring at the camera with these suspicious eyes, like he doesn't trust it, like he wants to be back in his home state of Morelos.
It captures their personalities perfectly.
Okay.
Villa, the expansive showman. Zapata, the suspicious, guarded localist.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. While they controlled the presidential chair, they didn't really control the government. They didn't have the bureaucrats, the administrators.
Right. They were warriors, not politicians.
And meanwhile, Carranza and Obregón had retreated to the port of Veracruz. They controlled the ports, they collected all the customs revenue, and they methodically rebuilt their army with new European weapons.
And then came 1915, the turning point, the Battle of Celaya.
If you are a fan of military history, this is just a fascinating, tragic moment. This is where the 19th century crashes headfirst into the 20th century, and the 19th century loses badly.
That is a fascinating way to frame it, because Villa's still fighting the Romantic War, isn't he?
He is. He believes in the power of the heroic cavalry charge, speed, shock, momentum. He thinks if he just hits the enemy hard enough and fast enough, they'll break and run like they always have.
But his opponent, Álvaro Obregón, has been doing his homework.
He's been doing his reading, he's been getting reports from Europe where World War I has just started, and he's paying attention.
So Obregón is looking at the Western Front. Yeah, trench warfare.
He is. He sees barbed wire, he sees interlocking fields of machine gun fire, he sees trenches and artillery, and he realizes that for the first time in modern history, defense is now much, much stronger than offense.
So Obregón finds a flat, open field at Celaya, tells his men to dig in, and just waits.
He lays a trap, and Villa, he just couldn't adapt. His ego, or perhaps his lack of formal training, just wouldn't let him see the new reality. He ordered his Dorados, his elite cavalry, the golden ones, to charge those machine gun nests.
I know.
Not once, but dozens of times over several days.
It must have been an absolute meat grinder.
It was suicide. It was brave, it was glorious, and it was pointless. Horses against Maxim guns. Villa lost thousands of his best men. The División del Norte effectively ceased to exist as a conventional army, and that defeat, it broke something in Villa's psyche.
This is where the narrative really shifts, isn't it? He stops being the Centaur of the North, this great general, and he goes back to being the wolf in the mountains.
Exactly. He's angry, he's humiliated, he feels betrayed, and he starts looking for someone to blame.
And the person he decides to blame is the United States.
He does.
Which seems like a big jump. Why the U.S.?
Well, there were a few reasons. First, the U.S. government, under Woodrow Wilson, had just officially recognized Carranza's government. They had picked a side in the Civil War, and they picked against him.
Okay, that's a diplomatic slap in the face.
It's more than that. The U.S. then allowed Carranza's army to use American railroads in Texas to move his troops from one part of Mexico to another to outflank Villa's forces.
Oh, that's a direct betrayal. Villa had spent years courting the Americans, giving interviews, protecting American property in Chihuahua.
Exactly. He felt stabbed in the back. And as his army shrank from thousands to just a few hundred men, his methods got darker. We have to acknowledge this part of this story.
The Robin Hood image cracks here.
It shatters. We start seeing credible stories of atrocities, the mass rape of women in the town of Namaquipa, the execution of civilians he suspected of collaborating with Carranza. He was lashing out like a wounded animal.
And then he decides to do the unthinkable. He decides to attack the United States directly. The raid on Columbus, New Mexico.
March 9th, 1916.
Now, was this just a rage-fueled tantrum? Or was there a strategy behind it?
It looks like a tantrum, but it was actually 4D chess. Villa wasn't stupid. He knew he couldn't conquer the U.S. with 500 guys.
Right.
But he knew that if he attacked a U.S. town and killed American citizens on American soil, the U.S. government would have to retaliate. They would have to invade Mexico to hunt him down.
And if the gringos invade Mexico?
Then Carranza looks weak. Carranza becomes the president who let the foreigners violate Mexican national sovereignty. Villa hoped that a massive American invasion would rally the Mexican people away from Carranza and back to his side to fight the common enemy.
That is an incredibly risky, but also a weirdly brilliant strategy.
It's a Hail Mary pass.
So he attacks. What actually happens in Columbus?
He sends his men into the small border town before dawn. They burn part of the town, they seize about 100 horses and mules, which they desperately needed, and they kill 18 Americans, mostly civilians.
And his own losses.
He actually lost about 80 of his own men in the fighting. The American garrison fought back harder than he expected, so militarily it wasn't a huge success, but politically the impact was exactly what he wanted.
President Woodrow Wilson must have been absolutely furious.
Furious is an understatement. The American public was screaming for blood, so he ordered the punitive expedition. He sent one of his best generals, John J. Blackjack Pershing, with an initial force of 5,000 U.S. troops into Mexico with one mission: capture Villa, dead or alive.
And this is a massive operation. This is where we see the debut of a lot of modern American military tech.
We really do. A young lieutenant named George S. Patton is there, making a name for himself. It's the first time the U.S. Army used trucks for logistics on a large scale.
And airplanes, right?
It's the first time they used airplanes for reconnaissance, these flimsy little Curtiss JN-3 Jennies.
So you literally have American airplanes flying over the desert hunting for a guy on a horse.
And they still couldn't catch him. For 11 months, the U.S. Army, the most modern military force in the hemisphere, wandered around the deserts and mountains of Chihuahua.
And if Linga just played them.
He played them like a fiddle. He led them on wild goose chases into canyons. He doubled back. He used his deep knowledge of the terrain. And the local population, who saw him as a hero fighting the invaders, they covered for him constantly.
It must have been deeply humiliating for Pershing and the U.S. Army.
It was a complete disaster. The trucks broke down in the desert, the airplanes crashed in the mountains, and Villa's legend grew even bigger. He was the one man who had tweaked the eagle's beak and gotten away with it. Eventually, with World War I heating up in Europe, the U.S. just quietly declared victory and went home empty-handed.
Speaking of World War I, there's that weird little subplot here involving Germany, right?
There is. You have to remember the timing. This is 1916, 1917. German agents were actively trying to stir up trouble for the U.S. to keep them distracted.
They wanted to keep the U.S. tied down in Mexico so they wouldn't send troops to France.
Precisely. So German agents did make contact with Villa. They wanted to use him as a proxy.
So was Villa actually working for the Kaiser?
It was purely transactional. Villa wasn't an ideological ally of Imperial Germany. He just needed guns and money. The U.S. had embargoed him, so when German agents offered to funnel him cash and ammo, he took it.
But he didn't become their puppet.
Not at all. When they suggested he start sabotaging American-owned oil fields in Mexico, he ignored them. He was using them just as much as they were using him.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 1920. The revolution has been grinding on for a full decade. The country is exhausted. And then the political landscape changes again.
It does. Carranza Villa's arch nemesis is assassinated.
Not by Villa.
No, ironically, he was killed by his own former allies, the Sonoran generals, led by Alvaro Obregón. With Carranza dead, the new interim government realized that the country desperately needed peace. And you couldn't have lasting peace with Pancho Villa still roaming the hills with an armed following.
So they decide to make a deal with him.
They do. The new president, Adolfo de la Huerta, reaches out. And it's an incredible deal that Villa negotiates.
What are the terms?
Villa agrees to lay down his arms and retire from public life. In exchange, the government gives him the Canutillo Hacienda, a massive 25,000-acre estate in Durango. They give a full pension to him and his men, and crucially, they allow him to keep a personal bodyguard of 50 armed men.
Wait, hold on. The government gave a 25,000-acre estate to the guy who started his entire career by shooting a hacienda owner for abusing his family.
The irony is rich, isn't it? The great agrarian revolutionary, the man who hated the hacendados, becomes one himself. The ultimate poacher-turned-gamekeeper.
What was his life like at Canutillo? Was he just sitting on the porch drinking tequila and getting fat?
Not at all. He couldn't sit still. He ran the hacienda like a military unit, but also like a kind of utopian community. He finally built that school he always talked about for the children of his veterans. He experimented with new crops.
But his personal life was, let's say, complicated.
The source material says he never bothered with conventional arrangements, which is a very polite way of putting it.
What does that mean?
It means Villa married many, many women. He often didn't bother divorcing the previous one before marrying the next. At Canutillo, he had Ostraberta Renteria living with him as his wife, even though his legal wife, Luz Corral, was still alive and well in Chihuahua City.
Sounds like a soap opera.
It was. But despite this comfortable retirement, Villa was restless. And more importantly, he was loose-lipped. He started giving interviews to journalists.
What was he saying?
He started talking about how he might re-enter politics for the 1924 election. He even told one journalist, "I can mobilize 40,000 men in a heartbeat if I want to."
Oh, that is not what the new government in Mexico City wanted to hear.
No. By this point, Obregón was president, and his hand-picked successor, Plutarco Elias Calles, was set to take over. They were trying to consolidate power and stabilize the country. A resurrected Pancho Villa with an army of 40,000 men was their absolute worst nightmare.
So we move to the final act, the assassination.
July 20, 1923. The town of Parral in Chihuahua. Villa felt very safe in Parral. He had a mistress there. He owned property. On this particular day, he was driving his car, a big, black 1919 Dodge touring car back from town to his ranch.
And he didn't have his full security detail with him.
No, and that was the fatal mistake. He had become complacent. He had only a few bodyguards in the car with him and his personal secretary.
And what happened?
As he drove past a schoolhouse, a man standing on the corner, a pumpkin seed vendor, shouted, "Viva Villa!"
A salute from a supporter.
It was a signal. He shouted it, and as Villa's car slowed to turn the corner, 7 riflemen stepped out of a house into the street.
In ambush.
A perfectly planned ambush. They unleashed a fusillade. They pumped over 40 rounds into the car in a matter of seconds.
And these weren't standard bullets, were they?
No. The autopsy showed they were using dum-dum bullets, expanding bullets, the kind you use for big game hunting.
Brutal. They wanted to make absolutely sure.
They did. Villa was hit 9 times in the head and chest. He died instantly. His hand was reportedly reaching for his pistol on the seat next to him, but he never even got a shot off.
There's a myth about his last words, isn't there? Something like, "Don't let it end like this. Tell them I said something."
Yes, that's a famous story, but it's almost certainly fiction. Given the massive trauma from those expanding bullets to his head and heart, he wouldn't have been able to speak a word. He was dead before the car even rolled to a stop against a tree.
So who did it? I mean, we know who pulled the triggers, but who paid for the bullets?
Well, the man who publicly claimed responsibility was a local politician named Jesus Salas Barraza, who apparently had a personal grudge against Villa. He claimed he did it to rid humanity of a monster.
But nobody believes that.
No serious historian believes he acted alone. The conspiracy points directly to the top.
To President Obregón and President-elect Calles.
Almost certainly. Villa was a political threat they could not afford. They needed him gone before the election. The assassins were very likely paid and protected by the federal government. Barraza, the supposed mastermind, spent a few months in a comfortable jail and was then quietly pardoned and released.
Incredible. And even in death, Villa couldn't seem to catch a break. His body was buried in Parral, but then something very weird happened to his head.
Yes, this is the final ghoulish chapter. 3 years later, in 1926, his grave was violated. Someone dug up his coffin, opened it, and sawed off his head.
Who steals a head? Why?
That is one of the great unsolved mysteries of Mexican history. The theories are wild. There are rumors that an American treasure hunter stole it to sell to an eccentric millionaire.
I've heard the Yale University story.
The persistent legend is that it ended up in the possession of the Skull and Bone Society at Yale. They, of course, deny it. But to this day, Pancho Villa's skull has never been found.
That is just gruesome. But eventually, his body, or what was left of it, was moved to a place of honor, right?
Yes, decades later. In 1976, the Mexican government exhumed his remains and moved them to the Monument to the Revolution in Mexico City.
And this really brings us to the legacy part of our deep dive. Because for a long, long time, he wasn't officially considered a national hero.
No, not at all. For decades, while the Sonoran dynasty, the political lineage of Obregón and Calles, ruled Mexico, Villa was officially a villain. He was the bandit, the traitor, the problem. It wasn't until those generations of politicians had passed from the scene that the government started to slowly reincorporate him into the national story.
And now, he's everywhere. Statues, street names on banknotes.
He is a full-blown folk hero. He represents the uncrushable, rebellious spirit of the North. He's the man who stood up to the hacendados, and more importantly, the man who stood up to the gringos and got away with it. The brutality, the atrocities, that's often forgotten, or at least minimized, in favor of the more romantic legend.
It's the power of myth. The man of two faces ultimately became one face in the public memory, the hero.
And that leads to a final, and I think very provocative thought for you to consider.
What's that?
Think about that monument to the revolution in Mexico City. It's this massive, solemn mausoleum. Inside, Pancho Villa's remains are interred in a place of high honor. But do you know who is right there in the tomb with him?
Who?
Venustiano Carranza, the man who tried to sabotage him, who cut off his coal, who betrayed him, and Plutarco Elias Calles, the man who almost certainly ordered his murder. They are all buried together as equals in the same monument.
Wait, really? They're roommates for eternity.
It's the ultimate historical irony. The state took these mortal enemies, men who killed each other's families, who hated everything the other stood for, and it lumped them all together into one unified revolutionary family. It erases the real, bloody, personal conflicts in favor of a nice, tidy national myth.
So the question is?
The question is, does remembering them together like that actually honor history, or does it sanitize it? Does it erase the very things that made the revolution what it was?
Wow. That is something to chew on. In the end, the revolution swallowed them all whole.
Indeed.
We'll leave you with that image. The bandit and the bureaucrats resting together for all time. Thanks for listening to the deep dive into the life of Pancho Villa. We'll catch you on the next one.